Oh, and I think that's my cue. Until next time, folks. This month marks the 18th anniversary of the game Portal. Aw, shoot, did I just create a time loop? It feels like Portal and its sequel are some of those games that literally every single gamer has played at some point in their lives. They're incredibly simple in concept, neither one is all that long, and yet I think you can make the argument for them being some of the absolute best, and certainly most impactful games of all time. They've led to countless memes, endless debates, a myriad of fan games, and nearly a groundbreaking contribution to the world of theoretical physics. Wait, what? Today, I want to tell you all the story of how 8 of humanity's greatest minds, spread over 4 centuries, nearly unraveled the fabric of time itself as they sought to solve one of the greatest mysteries at the core of our universe. And how a simple Portal fan game almost put it all back together. Richard, hit that intro. Before we get into it, you may have noticed that this video is a little bit longer than what I usually make. I put a whole lot of work into researching and editing this one, and I'd love for it to reach as many people as possible. So do me a solid and leave a comment of your favorite time travel paradox. Or, argue with someone else about theirs. It all helps in the algorithm. Alright, now grab some popcorn and get comfy, because our story today begins not 18 years ago at the release of Portal, but 300 years ago when Sir Isaac Newton invented calculus. I promise this will come back around to Portal eventually. As the story goes, Newton was innocently sitting under a tree when an apple struck him on the head and he suddenly thought, wait a second, gravity! Of course, the real story is a bit more complicated than that. It turns out that Newton was a pretty smart chap. He was a mathematician, an astronomer, and a physicist, the latter of which perhaps being the most impressive, considering the fact that modern-day physics did not exist yet. So, he invented it. Newton literally wrote the book on physics when he published Principia Mathematica, in which he established 3 of the most important concepts in physics: inertia, reaction, and force. You probably know these better as Newton's 3 laws of motion. An object at rest stays at rest unless acted upon by an outside force. For every action, there is an equal but opposite reaction, and any force is equal to a mass times an acceleration. And he didn't do all this just to give you another thing to memorize in school. It was all in service of his second title. See, Newton was fascinated by a very simple question. Why does the moon orbit around the Earth and the planets around the sun? Astronomers had known for 100 years at this point that the celestial bodies of our solar system all orbit around larger objects. But nobody could explain why. Newton wanted to be the first to answer that question, but doing so required a lot of very complicated math. So, he also invented calculus. So, yeah, Newton's revelations about gravity didn't come in a flash of falling fruit. It required years of hard work and the creation of several high school subjects, but he eventually discovered that any object with mass is able to exert a force of attraction on other objects with mass. He named this phenomenon gravity, a force that could keep the moon in orbit around the Earth and cause apples to fall from trees. Oh! However, while Newton was the first to understand how gravity worked, The one thing he could never figure out was how it worked. He knew that masses exerted a force of attraction on one another, but he didn't know how that force was transmitted. After all, space is a vacuum. There is no medium to convey this force. He called it the mystery of action at a distance, and it would go unsolved for his entire lifetime. And though Newton didn't know it at the time, the eventual answer would one day threaten our understanding of time and reality itself. But I'm getting ahead of myself. The question of action at a distance wouldn't be picked up for another 160 years, when another pretty smart chap that you may have heard of decided to take a little crack at it. Albert Einstein. Born in pre-war Germany, Einstein was a brilliant physicist who took an interest in the invisible forces driving our universe from a very early age, when his father bought him a compass that somehow always knew to point north. This fascination would put him on a collision course with Newton's unsolved mystery. And one day, while working as a simple patent officer, he had a thought that would change his life and the world of physics forever. Remember, Newton had discovered that any force, including the mysterious force of gravity, is equal to an object's mass times its acceleration, or its change in speed over time. Here on Earth, the acceleration due to gravity is always a constant 9.8 meters per second squared. That's why objects with more mass weigh more. If the acceleration is always constant, then the force of gravity is always proportional to mass. And that simple fact made Einstein wonder. If you were in a completely sealed and stationary room here on Earth, or a completely sealed room on a spaceship accelerating at exactly 9.8 meters per second squared, is there anything you could do to tell the difference? And he ultimately concluded that no! In both situations, every object in the room is experiencing the exact same acceleration, and therefore the exact same forces. Every object would weigh the same. If you threw a ball, it would follow the same trajectory. The two situations would appear to be identical. Perhaps because they are. Einstein realized that gravity was not a mysterious force reaching through the vacuum of space. Instead, like our theoretical rocket, it was simply the result of how objects move through four-dimensional space-time. This realization would eventually evolve into his landmark theory of general relativity, and I promise this will get back to Portal eventually. I feel like relativity is one of those things that most people have probably heard about, but don't really understand. Heck, before making this video, I was one of them. Put simply, it all has to do with the curvature of four-dimensional space-time, which sounds absolutely insane. I mean, we usually think of our world as having just 3 dimensions, but it's actually more intuitive than you think. See, a dimension is just something that you use to locate an object. So if you were trying to meet your friend, you would obviously need to tell them where you want to meet, but also when, right? You might say, meet me on the corner of 4th and 35th on the 3rd floor at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. So our universe has 3 dimensions of space plus 1 of time. Now, you might assume that space-time is the same everywhere, or more likely, never even think to question otherwise. But Einstein figured out that any object with mass is able to bend this 4-dimensional fabric, and it's through this bending that they're able to influence other masses at a distance. To quantify this phenomenon, Einstein created his field equations. Now, it may look super complicated, And it's actually way worse. That you can't even imagine how much worse it is than it looks. But essentially, the left side tells matter and energy how to curve space-time, and the right side tells matter and energy how to move through curved space-time. Not only can this equation predict the orbits of planets just as accurately as Newton, in some cases it's even more accurate and could answer all sorts of questions that Newton couldn't have even known to ask. That being said, a lot of Einstein's work on relativity does lead to some strange, seemingly impossible conclusions about our universe. Particles so dense that not even light can escape their gravitational fields, driving the movement of galaxies. The fact that an object's speed can affect its perception of time. And perhaps most alarming of all, opening up the possibility of time travel. About 20 years after Einstein published his field equations, a Dutch mathematician named Willem Jacob van Stockham noticed a strange side effect. Under very specific conditions, it was theoretically possible to create a curvature in space-time so extreme that one could return to a point in their own past. He called these closed time-like curves, and he wasn't the only one to discover them. A few years later, another mathematician named Kurt Gödel was able to create a model of the universe in which closed time-like curves were not only possible, but common. Right, so obviously 4-dimensional space-time isn't the easiest thing to wrap your head around, so let's look at a simplified 2-dimensional example with just 1 dimension of space and 1 dimension of time to kind of see what we're talking about here. As I'm sure you've noticed, we're free to move in any direction we want in space. Up, down, left, right, side to side, doesn't matter. Whatever we want, we can do it. But we can only move in one direction in time. You're always going forward, you can never go back the other way. So, say we start here in space-time. We are free to move wherever we want in space, but we always have to move in this direction in time. We can never go back the other way, which means that no matter how we move, however crazily we move, we can never get back to where we started, because we can never come back around this way. But remember, according to Einstein, space-time is not just a flat, constant thing. We can actually curve it and bend it however we want. So, it is theoretically possible, if we start here, and we create a curvature of space-time extreme enough. Let me see if I can do this on the first try. I haven't tried this yet. If we create a curvature so very extreme, we can draw a line through space-time starting here, and we can follow this. We can follow this straight line here that I messed up once, always going forward, never turning backwards in time, and yet, if we do it right, we can find that we still return to the same point that we started at. And this path right here that we just drew, this straight line that loops back to where it started, is called a closed time-like curve, or CTC, and it causes some big problems. Now, Stockham and Gödel weren't trying to suggest that these time travel loops were actually possible. On the contrary, they thought these models were signs of a flaw in Einstein's equation. Because of course, time travel cannot really exist. If it did, it would lead to all sorts of paradoxes. If you've watched, literally any time travel movie, you're probably familiar with this concept, but a paradox is an event that violates the laws of causality. A fundamental law of the universe that suggests that everything must have a cause, a reason for happening. Like Newton said, an object at rest cannot spontaneously start moving, something has to act upon it. The most famous is, perhaps, the grandfather paradox, which states that if you traveled back in time and killed your own grandfather when he was a child, then you could have never been born, and therefore would be incapable of traveling back in time to kill your grandfather in the first place. His death would have no cause. It's Marty McFly stopping his parents from going to the Enchantment Under the Sea dance together, basically. I don't know what these physicists have against grandpas. Now, these paradoxes create quite a problem for physicists. If, like Gödel found, time travel to the past is not only possible, but theoretically quite common, then there'd be nothing stopping people from popping throughout time, committing mass parricide, and unraveling the logic of existence itself. So clearly, there must be more to this mystery that Einstein missed. And so, Newton's big question of action at a distance was replaced by another. Why hasn't time exploded yet? It seems like a pretty simple question to solve, considering the fact that, well, we know time is fine. And yet, the more physicists work to disprove closed time-like curves, the more real they seem to become. In 1974, American mathematician Frank Tipler expanded on Stockham's work and found that it was possible to use an infinitely long cylinder rotating at the speed of light to drag the fabric of space-time and tear open holes in time itself, making him the first to propose a physical method for creating closed time-like loops, and not the last. In 1988, American theoretical physicist Kip Thorne enters our story, and for a very strange reason. He was doing some consulting work for sci-fi novelist Carl Sagan, who wanted to include a plausible method for time travel in his next book. And Thorne clearly understood the assignment, creating a method so plausible that he thought, well, hang on, wait a second, did I just actually create time travel? Thorne had done a lot of work in the past on wormholes, a similar phenomenon to closed time-like curves that connect two distant points in space instead of time. So going back to our paper example, let's pretend that this is like two-dimensional space, and if you could fold it in such a way and punch through, then you could theoretically create a bridge connecting two very distant points in space that you could travel between in an instant. Kind of like what we see in Portal, which I promise we are getting to. Remember earlier when I briefly mentioned that your speed affects your perception of time? Well, it sounds insane, but essentially Einstein figured out that every object and particle in existence is moving at the speed of light through space-time. Now, people like us who aren't moving all that fast through space experience time at a constant rate. But as your speed increases, approaching the speed of light, your experience of time must decrease to maintain the balance, to the point where photons of light do not experience time at all. Absolutely insane, and a subject for another day. Anyway, Thorne realized that if you created a wormhole and accelerated one end to near the speed of light, that end would remain fixed in time, while the other one continued on into the future as normal, resulting in a bridge through both space and time. Now, this idea kind of freaked Thorne out because he couldn't think of a plausible reason why it wouldn't work. And so, in one of the first instances of American and Soviet collaboration post-Cold War, Thorne turned to Russian astrophysicist Igor Novikov and basically said, hey man, I found this absolutely insane thing. Please help me prove myself wrong. See, Novikov was an expert in something called the Cauchy problem, a question of whether or not the universe can evolve consistently from the same initial conditions. Basically the physics version of predestination, only with a lot more math and a lot less deeper meaning of why, no, you don't understand, I was meant to eat this chocolate bar right now. Together, he and Thorne proposed the Novikov self-consistency principle, which suggested that even if time travel to the past is possible, the probability of a paradoxical event occurring must be 0. Essentially, the universe must be able to protect itself from inconsistencies. How? Well, they didn't know. But according to this principle, if you tried to go back in time to kill your grandfather, something would prevent you from doing so every time. You'll always miss your bus or get caught in traffic or go to the wrong address. Which seems suspiciously like magic or the plot of a really cool anime, but hey, what do I know? And to be clear, there is like a crap ton of math behind it. They didn't just write, hey, but what if you couldn't do that with the shrug emoji? Though it kind of seems like they just replaced one existential question with an even bigger existential question. And by the way, both Thorne and Novikov are very much still alive today. It's crazy to think that Newton's little mystery of how the Earth exerts a force on an apple has evolved in ways that he couldn't possibly imagine, and its ramifications are still being debated today. Because even now, all this time later, nobody has been able to prove that backwards time travel is impossible. In fact, the more people work on it, the more achievable it seems to become, which is a little terrifying. Of course, not all physicists share the same existential dread about closed time-like curves. Stephen Hawking, famous astrophysicist and pioneer in the world of quantum mechanics, famously found the whole debate quite silly. In 1992, he published his own paper called the chronology protection conjecture, where he essentially poked fun at all the physicists like Thorne and Novikov for taking the idea of time travel too seriously, sarcastically saying, "It seems there is a chronology protection agency, which prevents the appearance of closed time-like curves, and so makes the universe safe for historians." And somewhere an exec at Marvel was like, write that down, write that down! Compared to all those who came before him, Hawking's conjecture on closed time-like curves was quite simple. There is some undiscovered law of physics that explicitly prevents time travel. We just haven't figured it out yet. After all, Hawking rightly realized that all of these theories are based on one pretty big assumption: that Einstein's theory of relativity was complete. But even Einstein himself would tell you that's not true. After all, just like Newton, who knew that gravity existed, but not how it was enacted, Einstein could calculate how space-time curved in response to matter, but had no idea why. Not to say that the theory of relativity is wrong, of course, just that it doesn't paint the full picture. Hawking even ran his own little experiment to prove this conjecture. On June 28th, 2009, he threw a party for all future time travelers at the University of Cambridge, but didn't tell anyone about it until the following day. Unsurprisingly, nobody showed up. And I'm inclined to think that Hawking was probably correct. After all, while physicists like Gödel, Tipler, and Thorne were all able to prove the theoretical existence of time travel, all of the methods they suggested to achieve it are physically impossible in practice. You cannot have an infinitely long cylinder rotating at the speed of light, and keeping a wormhole open for more than an instant would require an object with negative energy, which as far as we know, doesn't exist. Maybe creating a closed time-like curve is like moving a big couch into a small apartment building. Sure, there's theoretically enough room for it inside, you just can't get it through the door. Then again, maybe isn't a very convincing argument in the world of physics. Maybe creating real CTCs is impossible, or maybe we just don't know how to do it yet. If it is possible in theory, there's always a chance that it's possible in practice too. And so, this mystery that began at the dawn of modern physics 360 years ago that has stumped the minds of countless brilliant physicists across history remains unsolved. That is, until 2021. That's right, it's time to justify making a whole video about the history of physics by talking about Portal. I promise this is still in my niche, YouTube, okay? Please don't bury me here. For those who have never played it, Portal is a mind-bending puzzle game where you can use a portal gun to create doorways through space, kind of like Thorne's wormholes. In 2021, developer Janice Brinkman thought, hey, you know what would make this game a lot simpler? If we added time travel to it. Portal Reloaded is an excellent mod of Portal 2. Here, you can still create your usual blue and orange portals to move through space, but you also have a third green portal that instantly connects you to a point 20 years in the future, allowing you to travel back and forth through time. Or I guess forth and back? I don't know. And somehow, this lone game developer has managed to do what every physicist we talked about before failed to accomplish. Bring the world of time travel and causality together. In fact, not only does this game include causality in its time travel logic, it makes it a central gameplay mechanic. And it works like this. Anything that you do in the past will affect the future, but actions in the future don't affect the past. So, if you picked up a cube and moved it in the past, the future version of that cube would also move to where you left it. However, if you move the future version of that cube, it does not affect the past. So if we move it here, we can see it's moving there. But if we go to the future, moving something in the future doesn't change the past, right? Which makes sense. Now, things get a little more complicated when you start bringing objects through the time portals. But remember, everything must obey the basic laws of causality. So let's say that you took a cube from the future and brought it through the time portal to the past. You would now have two versions of the same cube existing together in the same time, with one being 20 years older than the other. Now this is very strange, yes, but it does not violate the laws of causality. That past version of the cube will continue to exist for the next 20 years so that you can come in and grab it and bring it to the past. However, the moment you move that past version of the cube, you have changed its future, and it will no longer be in that original spot for you to come and grab it and bring it to the past. So what happens? Does time unravel? Have you created a cube with no possible origin? No. The future version of that cube pulls a Marty McFly and simply vanishes and reappears in the same spot that you left the present cube 20 years in the future. But what about the other way around? What if you tried to bring the past cube through the portal to the future? Following the same logic, you should create another copy of the cube, but this time in the future, right? So you pick up the past cube, run through, and it's destroyed. Why? Well, it's because it's following the laws of causality. Remember, if you remove a cube from the future, it has no effect on the past. But if you remove a cube from the past, then it can no longer exist in the future. Now, admittedly, the game does take one liberty here. Technically speaking, it should be the future cube that's destroyed, not the past one. If you leave a cube in one place and follow it through time, it will be in that exact same place 20 years in the future. However, if you remove the past cube from time, then it will no longer exist to age into the 20-year-old version of itself. Therefore, the future cube will have no cause to exist and should be destroyed. But the causality of the past cube hasn't been changed. You simply picked it up and carried it to another point in space-time. And we see the game obey this logic in all other instances. After all, you also start in the past, and you're not annihilated the moment you walk through a portal. So yes, you could call this a mistake, but from a gameplay standpoint, it's a lot easier for players to see and understand the consequences of their actions if the cube in their hand is destroyed, as opposed to one laying on the other side of the room, so I'll let it slide. Great, so the causality of a cube remains intact. But I mean, it's not like those cubes are going around trying to murder their grandparents, right? What about us, the humans? Surely our reckless meddling can create some sort of paradox, right? I mean, we were able to create two versions of a cube in the same timeline. And anytime you interact with a time-traveling version of yourself, it's basically guaranteed to create a paradox. Forget your grandfather. What's to stop you from going back through the portal, finding a past version of yourself, punching them in the face, and tossing their portal gun into a vat of acid? Well, aside from the fact that that's an absolutely insane thing to think to do, it's actually not possible. And not because of some vague Novikov probability. It's impossible because the past version of you already left. Let's look closer at the scenario in the game and track your actions through time. If you start in the past, open a time portal, and go to the future, you might expect to find an older version of yourself walking around that can hook you up with a sports almanac and make you rich. But you won't. Just like the cube, if you left the past, then you're no longer there to be able to age into that older version of yourself. So you can't gain any forbidden knowledge, the future you can't try to murder you and erase both of you from existence. There's no paradoxes here. And then if you go back through the portal to your original time, you won't meet another younger version of yourself because, well, you are the younger version of yourself, and you won't be there because you're here. In a sense, this game employs a version of Novikov's self-consistency principle, but it's not some magical will of the universe possessing the bus driver to drop you off at the wrong stop and spare your grandfather your bloodlust. The mechanics of time travel simply render those interactions impossible. And the way it does this is actually quite simple. The time portal gun only allows time travel to the future, not the past. Now I know this sounds like a big cop-out. After all, according to Stockham and Gödel, backwards time travel should be possible. If you can bend space-time in just the right way, you can create a loop from your point in time to any point in the past. And that's true. But then again, from a certain point of view, these time portals do connect to a point in the past. You're just not at the starting point. Maybe there's one last component required to create a closed time-like curve. Time. Every physicist we've talked about has assumed that it's possible to effectively, instantly bend space-time enough to create a portal in our present to our own past. What if that process isn't instant? Maybe when you first open that time portal, it creates a pocket of mass or energy that slowly grows over the next 20 years, slowly warping space-time until it connects back to you. In essence, you're not traveling to the future, you're bringing the future to you. With this one little caveat, we can create a world where Gödel, Novikov, and Hawking are all right. You can create a method of time travel that, by its very mechanics, prevents any causal violations, still allows for the existence of closed time-like curves, and explains why nobody showed up to Hawking's party. You forgot to unlock the door, man. So, did he do it? Like Kip Thorne before him? Did Janice Brinkman create a method of time travel so plausible that it moved into the realms of possible? Well, no. While this game is incredibly thorough in its logic and consistency, there is one method of time travel that it doesn't explore, and well, it's the one we're doing right now. Waiting. All this time, we've been assuming that you opened a time portal and immediately walked right through it. And if you do that, yes, it's impossible to interact with any future or past versions of yourself. But what happens if you open a time portal, pop a squat, and wait 20 years so you can walk back through the other side? If you do come back, you would find a past version of yourself sitting there waiting. It's essentially the exact same thing that happened with the cube. And if you do that, then there's nothing stopping you from letting your intrusive thoughts win and acquainting the past version of yourself with that pit of acid over there. And if you do that, then you could no longer sit through time to eventually come back and throw yourself in said acid. You've created a paradox and didn't need to harm anyone's grandpa to do it. Man, I am really trying to get around YouTube's demonetization filter here, but I feel like it's just getting worse and worse. Or heck, even if you're not a crazy person, what if you just sat and waited with your past self? Well, then shouldn't that future version of you have always been sitting there waiting the whole time? And then what if you both went back through the portal when it eventually opened? Then you'd have 3 versions of yourself, each separated by 20 years. And if you did this over and over and over again, you could theoretically create an infinite number of clones of yourself. Or well, probably realistically only like 4 if you're lucky, since each one still ages. But I mean, that still can't be good. Now, I wish I could sit here and reveal the super clever physics trick that fixes this whole thing. But again, if I did, well then I would have just actually invented time travel and probably wouldn't be making this video. I'd probably be binging every Star Wars movie that's ever come out. Or, you know, something actually important, I don't know. And that is the full story of how a Portal fan game almost solved a problem that has stumped physicists for over 300 years. But unfortunately, it seems that unlike these time-like curves, this mystery remains open for now. And speaking of time, if you've made it to this point in the video, then I'm sure you've noticed that this one is a little bit longer than what I usually make. I had a lot of fun making it, but it did take up a lot of work and time that I can't yet get back. Thanks for nothing, Kip! Except, you know, all those, like, contributions to the world of physics. I guess that's fine. Anyway, if you want to see more videos bringing the worlds of science and video games together, then hit that subscribe button. I upload new videos every single Friday, and I'm getting super close to 50,000 subscribers, so it'd be really cool to get over the top by the end of the month. Also, you may have noticed that all the gameplay in this video was taken from a live stream that I did for my supporters on Patreon. Making videos like this is always a risk because you never know if the algorithm will bless you with a return on your investment. But if you're able, any direct support from Patreon can allow me to take cooler risks like this more often. And you know, you could also watch me stomp the rest of this game now that I'm possessed with the knowledge of time itself. So that should be fun. Anyway, I hope you all liked the video, and tune in next week. I don't know what the topic will be yet, but I do know that it's going to be a whole lot shorter. Oh, and I think that's my cue. Until next time. This month marks the 18th anniversary of the game Portal. Oh shoot, did I just create a time loop? And cause apples to fall from trees. Oh! It didn't go exactly as planned. I'm running out of room on this apple. What? Nope. Got it. What? Oh. What? Oh! I gotta say the line though, and then do that. And of course, a massive thank you to all my supporters on Patreon, including Alex, Alakazam, Big Dog Ty for the win, Captain Kirby, Sidian, Sherry and Mark, Stylish, The Boss Killer 94, Ty Studio, and Moki Ubu.